Draft strategy wise, quarterback is typically the biggest mistake I see people make. Now, obviously, I'm going to give you the rankings. I'm going to give you strategy as well at the end. Just make sure you follow along. Tier 1, we are going to go Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. If we look at Allen, there's been no quarterback from a fantasy perspective to be more consistent over the past 6 seasons. You've actually seen Josh Allen play at least 16 games every single year since 2019. And with this, over the past 5 seasons, Josh Allen has been the QB2, the QB1, the QB3, the QB1, and the QB3 in points per game. So you have a crazy high ceiling. Not only do you have that high ceiling, but at the same time, you have the highest floor of any quarterback in fantasy, which is why we are going to have to put him at 1, because arguably Lamar Jackson does have a higher ceiling between the two of them. Because if we go ahead and we look at Lamar Jackson, we can actually see this past year, Lamar up at 25.3 points per game. We can go back to 2019 where Lamar Jackson averaged over 27 points per game, and Josh Allen's never had a season where he's hit 25. Now, with this as well, Lamar Jackson obviously has missed considerably more time than what you've had with Josh Allen. Lamar Jackson has played 16 games in his NFL season twice, and we do have the little string of games missed in both 2021, 2022. I think if you're looking at the way that they're built, Josh Allen is just going to be the more durable option between the two. But regardless, both quarterbacks should be building blocks for you. And depending on your league settings, you're either going to look to take Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen in round 2 or round 3. Where I'm going to be ranking these guys as round 2 picks is if you're going to be in leagues with only one flex spot and you only start 2 wide receivers, because quarterback's going to make up a very high percentage of your starting lineup output. Now, as you add in additional flex options, as you add more teams to your league where it's going to be more important for you to build skill positional depth across wide receiver and running back, there we're going to have Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen as round 3 selections. Now, dropping down to our second tier, we're going to have Jayden Daniels and Jalen Herz. Now, back at the beginning of the offseason, I just threw all these quarterbacks in the same tier because realistically, you go ahead and you look over the past 4 years, Jalen Herz has actually averaged 22 points per game in comparison to Lamar Jackson, 21.7, and Josh Allen at 23.4. So Jalen Herz has been just as good as these other guys, which is why in underdog drafts this year, Jalen Herz is inside my top 5 when it comes to total dollars spent in drafts, not just among quarterbacks, but among all my drafted players. And if we are going to look at the reason I'm putting him the tier below, is it's just not a reasonable projection for me to ever say that you could consider taking Jalen Herz ahead of Lamar or ahead of Allen, where we did only have 24 passing attempts per game last year with Saquon Barkley added in this offense, as well as the fact that they had arguably the best team in the NFL by a country mile. Now, there is some room for growth, which is why I am heavily investing in a Jalen Herz at the 4-5 turn, because if Barkley gets injured, if this defense is any worse, if this team just plays closer games, there's only one direction for the passing volume in Philadelphia to go, and that would be up for Jalen Herz, who again was significantly lower in his average passing attempts per game this past season than we have seen over the past 4 years. Now, I am going to put Jayden Daniels ahead of Jalen Herz, however. If we look at Daniels, I know it seems like he was amazing from the beginning of his rookie year until the very end, which is true. But if we look under the hood and we use the player comparison tool on flockfantasy.com, you'll see that the first 9 weeks of Jayden Daniels' season, he averaged 19.2 fantasy points per game, and that jumped up to 24.3 fantasy points per game in the final 6 weeks. In the final 6 weeks, he was 12th in the NFL in passing attempts, 11th in completions, 6th in passing touchdowns, 11th in total touchdowns. He was 3rd in rushing attempts and number 1 in rushing yards. And where you see Jayden Daniels jump up into that Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen tier is if we can see the rushing touchdowns go up for Jayden Daniels. But the issue is just we haven't seen Jayden Daniels get inside the top 5 players in the NFL when it comes to his rushing touchdown volume. But 100% that could go in a positive direction this year. Where I'd be looking to take Jayden Daniels and Jalen Herz is if you are drafting in a league where it's only 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. There, I think you take Jayden Daniels in round 3 or Jalen Herz at the very beginning of round 4. But again, if you're playing in a multi-flex league, then at that point, I think you push Jayden Daniels down to the beginning of the 4th and you push Jalen Herz down to the end of the 4th round. But I do want to remind you that I actually have made a draft sheet for your exact league format. Yes, it's true. We have 50 draft sheets available on flockfantasy.com. I just spent the last 12 hours updating this. It's been an absolute grind, and we're going to update them every single week until the season gets here. If you want to get access to a draft sheet for your exact league settings, you can find the link to flockfantasy.com in the description as well as the comment section. And we just dropped the best deal that we have ever had on the site by a country mile, a $34 season pass that gets you access to everything on flockfantasy.com, including weekly rankings, consistently updated rest of season rankings, trade calculator, trade finder, my teams page, player comparison, range of outcomes tool, all until January 1st. And if you use code FLOCK when you sign up, I'll answer your start sit questions and your trade questions when we are live streaming every single night during this season. Now let's move this over to the third tier. Joe Burrow is going to be by himself. While 100% I understand, Joe Burrow did go out there and finish as the QB3 this past season with 21.93 points per game, which was slightly ahead of Jalen Herz. In a 4-point passing touchdown format, you can't put Burrow there. If we are looking at Joe Burrow versus Jalen Herz over the past 5 seasons, you've had Jalen Herz averaging an additional 2 fantasy points per game, which would equate to an additional 50 yards passing per game. It's not because Jalen Herz throws the ball more. Obviously, if you look at them in the player comparison, Joe Burrow in the past 5 years has been top 3 in the NFL in completions per game, completion percentage, passing yards. He's number 1 in the NFL over the past 5 years in passing touchdowns per game. He's top 10 in adjusted yards per pass attempt. As a passer, he's significantly better. But we go over and we look at Jalen Herz. Jalen Herz, first in the NFL in rushing attempts per game, first in the NFL in rushing touchdowns per game, and 4th in the NFL in rushing yards per game. Now, the way that you could put Joe Burrow in that same tier as Jaden Daniels, in that same tier as Jalen Herz, is if you're playing in a 6-point passing touchdown format. 6-point passing touchdown leagues, there you're going to actually be okay passing on the quarterbacks with the elite rushing for these guys that could lead the NFL in passing like Joe Burrow can. But in a 4-point passing touchdown format, even with Burrow just absolutely crushing Jalen Herz over the past 5 years with the passing volume, he still can't come close in the fantasy points. And I think we should expect some natural regression for Joe Burrow this next year. I don't know if it's a safe thing to say that he's going to have 43 passing touchdowns again. So I've seen a big issue, in my opinion, in Sleeper, Yahoo, ESPN drafts. A lot of people are taking like Joe Burrow in round 4 at the very beginning of round 5. I want you to get an elite quarterback if you're drafting in a league with only 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. But you are much better off just drafting Jalen Herz, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen slightly ahead of Joe Burrow versus waiting around and getting Burrow at a quote-unquote discount when they're not in the same tier. Now, another mistake we see people making, and this is like the worst thing you could do in drafts. I know I've said this over and over again, but I'm doing all these drafts on all these different platforms to try to get a great sense of what you're going to be actually experiencing in your league, is going through and drafting these tier 4 quarterbacks in rounds 5 and 6. I see a consistent trend of people going through and taking their 2 running backs, taking their 2 wide receivers, maybe taking a flex, and then going like, oh, why would I draft a 3rd wide receiver to go on my bench when I can take Patrick Mahomes here at the beginning of the 6th round? The teardrop that you have from 3 to 4 is massive. Now, don't get me wrong. I've drafted a ridiculous amount of Patrick Mahomes in underdog drafts. I do like the Mahomes ceiling case. I understand the past 2 years, he's averaged only 17.6 points per game. They definitely scaled back how far downfield that he is throwing the ball. Because if we look at the previous 5 seasons before that, Patrick Mahomes averaged 23.5 points per game, and he was the QB1 during that stretch by a country mile. During that stretch, he was top 10 in the NFL in passing attempts a game, passing completions a game, completion percentage. He was number 1 in passing yards, number 2 in passing touchdowns per game, and you get some rushing as well. My personal belief is Patrick Mahomes is not going to be as bad in fantasy football this year as he's been over the past 2 years. He's not going to be as good as he was during that 5-year stretch, but now that you have Worthy, Hollywood, Rashee Rice all together, I do think you are going to see Mahomes kind of meet that season in the middle. But again, don't take him in round 5. Don't take him in round 6. If you want the elite quarterback, just take Hertz. Just take Jaden Daniels 2 rounds before. I'd say the same thing with Baker Mayfield. With Baker, you get Igbuka added into this core, which is already insane, where he had 4,500 passing yards last year, 41 passing touchdowns. He finishes as the QB4 in points per game. And if you actually looked at what he was doing at the beginning of the season before the Chris Godwin injury, it was even crazier. Now, naturally, we are expecting these quarterbacks that were such outliers when it comes to the passing volume to scale back. Historically, the only quarterbacks that we were able to see be those traditional pocket passing options and not really give you the edge on the ground as well, sustain over a long period of time, were guys like Drew Brees, somebody like Tom Brady. I mean, yes, we had a decade where NFL quarterbacks looked very different. Here, it's really tough to ever project a quarterback to go back-to-back seasons with 4,500 passing yards. I know everybody hates Kyler Murray, but in reality, Kyler Murray's never finished lower than the QB 12 in points per game. And Kyler Murray is going into his 7th NFL season. So the absolute floor for Kyler is he is a QB 1. And the ceiling case for Kyler is we've seen him get up to 23.5 points per game. Like, we've seen the rushing there. We've seen him average 51 rushing yards per game. And then going over and looking at Bo Nix, I've been drafting a ton of them, specifically in Underdog Best Ball drafts. There you have to draft multiple quarterbacks, so you can't just say either take an elite player or wait until the very end. And with Bo Nix, not only did he have a great season where he finishes as the QB8, but he showed natural progression through it as well. Because if we look at weeks 1 through 9, you'll see that Bo Nix averaged 16.5 points per game versus weeks 10 through 17, he averaged 19. And at the same time, he averaged more passing attempts, passing completions, completion percentage, passing yards, passing touchdowns, total touchdowns, a higher adjusted yards per attempt. The only thing that got worse from the beginning of the year to the end of the year is you actually did see Bo Nix run the ball significantly less. I like this tier of quarterbacks, don't get me wrong, but I think a big issue is they're just going too high in drafts. The main thing I need to point out is the gap between tier 2 and tier 4 is a lot larger between the gaps from tier 4 to tier 6. Now, going over to tier 5, we're going to have Caleb, Purdy, Justin Fields, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott. This is the last tier where I'd feel comfortable saying, this is my quarterback 1. This is the guy that I'm going to be starting week 1, and I'm going to be confident in doing so. Now, good news for you is if you're drafting in a 10-team league, if you're drafting in a 12-team league, there are 14 viable quarterbacks. Some would make the argument that there are 15, 16, 17. So you don't need to go out there and you don't need to scramble and panic if only 4 of these guys are left when you're on the clock, because at that point, everybody else in your draft will already have drafted their starting quarterback, and you should have whoever's at the bottom of this tier in your draft falling a considerable amount to almost the very end. And if we go ahead and look at Caleb Williams to kick us off, no situation has improved more from 2024 to 2025. We all know significantly better offensive line. We all know significantly better coaching staff. We all know they add in Loveland and Luther Burden. You've heard it 1,000 times. But also, we already had natural progression for Caleb Williams last year. The first 9 weeks of the season, he averaged 14.3 points per game. The final 8 weeks, he jumped up to 16.1. He increased his passing attempts a game, completions a game, completion percentage, passing yards per game, passing touchdowns per game, total touchdowns per game. He has significantly fewer interceptions. He increased his adjusted yards per pass attempt. He increased his rushing attempts a game. He increased his rushing yards per game. Caleb across the entire board was a better quarterback in the second half of the year than he was at the beginning of the season. And now you're just pouring gasoline on that fire. If we're looking at all these quarterbacks in 2024, clearly Jared Goff is the one that stands out, where Jared Goff was for sure the best from a fantasy perspective. Goff was actually the QB7. He finished with 19.1 points per contest. But again, if you're in that 4-point passing touchdown league, the rushing ceiling is going to be severely limited with somebody like Jared Goff, and we're always expecting some natural regression to hit. So when we're looking at Goff's volume last year, over 4,600 passing yards, almost 40 passing touchdowns, the baseline expectation should be that's coming back down to earth. And I do want to point out as well that obviously you lose Ben Johnson, and at the same time, you are losing a pretty big difference-making player with the offensive line. Now, going down to tier 6, this is the tier where you can go ahead and grab your backup quarterback. So One thing that I really want to hammer in strategy-wise is instead of drafting like a tier 4 quarterback in rounds 5, 6, 7, I want you to either wait until the double-digit rounds and take your first QB as like Jared Goff, and then at the end of the draft, you get your QB2 and you play the matchups. This would be your QB2 range. Or obviously, you don't play around. If you're in a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format, just take Lamar in the second, just take Josh Allen in the second. And we have this all laid out in the sheets for you. If you're following the sheets, I promise you, you're going to nail the quarterback strategy. With Drake May, significant improvement. I understand that if you want to go through and if you want to look at just the raw points per game numbers, they don't look super special, 13.6 points per game. But what you really need to do is you need to throw out the games where Drake May barely had any action whatsoever. Like we need to throw out week 8 where he only had 6 pass attempts. We need to throw out week 18 where he only had 1 pass attempt, right? So look at the weeks that he was actually a starting quarterback. He did move up to 16.4 points per game, but we never saw him crack 21 points in a single week his rookie season. I know that people are excited that he looked really good from a real life perspective. He averaged 36 rushing yards per game. Definitely a much better coaching staff. They try to make improvements in the offensive line, try to make improvements with the wide receiver core. So I'm going to give Drake May the benefit of the doubt. We're going to move him up these ranks in comparison to where he finished last season, but I do think it's almost overstated the impact that he made from a fantasy perspective in his rookie year. Looking at JJ McCarthy, he's a complete unknown. No idea if this guy's going to be any good, but what I can say is I don't think Sam Darnold's that great in this situation. Propped up Sam Darnold to be a damn good quarterback last year. You have Jefferson, you have Addison, you have Hawkinson, and you have arguably one of the best coaching staffs in the NFL, plus a significantly improved offensive line. Jordan Love did fall back considerably from 2023 to 2024. A lot of it stemmed on just his dropbacks. I mean, you had 34 passing attempts per game in 2023, only 28 passing attempts per game in 2024. Obviously, you saw the injury at the beginning of the season, which a lot of people want to use that as an excuse for him. Going over and looking at Justin Herbert, we had the passing volume get scaled back significantly as well. You had 35 passing attempts per game in 2023. New coaching staff comes in. That scales back to 29.5. And I recently did have to move Justin Herbert down our rankings because you lose arguably your best offensive lineman. I understand Joe Alt's pretty good. I understand he's going to move to left tackle. But regardless, this takes it from a top 10 offensive line in the league to a much worse spot. Going over and looking at CJ Stroud scaled back dramatically across the entire board from being the best rookie quarterback that we had seen up until 2023 to being a very disappointing option in 2024. Offensive line shouldn't be great either. You don't have much rushing upside. Trevor Lawrence has never made a difference from a fantasy perspective, and now he's going into year 5, but at the same time, you have the best set of weapons that he's ever had and potentially a good coaching staff that obviously looked pretty good with Baker Mayfield last year. Looking at Michael Penix at the end of this, yes, week 18, he looks good against the Carolina Panthers, but very similar to McCarthy. Realistically, we have no idea what Michael Penix is going to be. And then going down to tier 7, tier 8, tier 9, in reality, these are only guys that are interesting from a super flex perspective. Or best ball, of course. If you're drafting on Underdog, all these quarterbacks are going to get drafted. If you're drafting in a super flex draft, you probably need to go for them. But when it comes to a regular redraft league, I would say these are guys that you need to leave out there on the waiver wire. I wouldn't waste a roster spot on them unless I was in like a 14-team format where obviously things get a little bit deeper. But overall, I really want to just hammer in that from tier 2 to tier 4, there's a massive tier drop. And for that reason, I love the idea of those leagues where you only have 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, you getting an elite quarterback. And a league with multiple flex spots, or maybe a lot of teams in the league, maybe you go 0 RB because it's more important to build out your skill positions. But regardless, if you want to know exactly how we're valuing these positions, make sure you go ahead and check out the draft sheets that we have over there on flockfantasy.com. Because there we will be adjusting for your exact league format. We got 50 draft sheets. Pick your platform, pick your format, just use one. And obviously, if you're not already a member of the site, we just dropped our best offer by a country mile. $34 gets you access to everything on flockfantasy.com from now until January 1st, including the weekly rankings throughout the entire season, including the rest of season rankings updated every Sunday night, as well as Trade Calculator, My Team's page, Trade Finder, the whole 9 yards. If you use code FLOCK, I'll be answering your trade questions and your start set questions during the season with the nightly live streams as well. But I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you and really hope I get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.